Hello everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my transfer plans for Gameweek 30, but I thought it would make sense to segment the video by recapping Gameweek 29, of course, where I did press the free hit button. It was mildly successful, let's be honest. The game week was horrible, and the less said about it, really, the better. But worth talking about sort of the decisions there, recapping that briefly, and then we'll go on towards discussing Game Week 30 and how I plan to navigate the landscape of FPL now that the fixtures are announced as well. The fixtures, of course, have been announced, and I think the recommendation that I would give, of course, is to have a look at Ben Crellin's Twitter page, have a look at, for example, how he's laid out the fixtures. The key change, of course, is we have a double game week for Arsenal and Liverpool, and we also have that Man City match versus Brighton on Game Week 34. And of course, the impact of that as well is that you have some changes, like let's say Chelsea, Tottenham being rescheduled and Tottenham having a blank. So that blank is interesting because unfortunately it creates a little bit of hokey cokey with someone like Son. So all these Spurs players that we've been investing into, it does make sense, I think, even more so if you have the wild card remaining, to consider, for example, pushing your plans back. If you, let's say, have a regular team you've wildcarded already, you kind of need to consider the idea of going in and out of Spurs players basically around Game Week 34. So that's just the idea. But anyways, recapping, of course, Game Week 28 and the free hit. I think the big decision that I made, obviously, was, my undying love for Chris Wood for this week. And it paid off. It paid off because a lot of people went for Morris. Some people also did extremely well going for Dacho Fofana, who did really well. Potentially Brentford, of course, they've been horrible this season, but I also think coming down to it, you are playing versus Burnley and going down to 10 men, that is just a slice of misfortune, and getting the player who created it all is somewhat even more comical with Reguilon. But you can only really laugh about things like that. We expected everyone to lose their clean sheets, hence why we picked attacking fullbacks. Didn't really work out with Doughty and Porro, but that is also what it is. In the midfield, bunch of blanks as well. Muniz, of course, someone who did brilliantly. And this Fulham team is an interesting look because Muniz reminds me of what sort of is like a Budget Watkins right now, where he's not going to have any double game weeks for the rest of the season. But for a lot of people who are looking for a very, very elegant striker at a very good price, provided that he's obviously fine and he's not injured or anything like that, he could be very interesting going forwards, just so that he allows for managers who have a slightly smaller budget to become a make weight. And of course, that's something to think about always consistently. But Martinez, I don't think I was planning on playing him, so that was a bit of regret. And Reguilon, once we got the news that he was going to start, I don't really think that in my mind I ever thought I was going to move away from Reguilon. So that is what it is. Gibbs, White, and Wood saved the day. That's the free at 29 review. Happy that it's over. Happy that I don't have to see any more Brentford players in my team outside of Flecken, but hopefully I'll find a way to get rid of him quite soon. And the only thing I wanted to talk about now is just the fixture landscape as well. So as I said, this is the fixture landscape as per Ben Crellin. There was a small chance that Ben intonated of a double or a triple game week rather with Tottenham in game week 37. I'm going to ignore that because I don't think it's very likely going to happen. But that's something, of course, we might have to be open to later down the line. What it does mean, though, in terms of Game Week 34, as you can see, is for us who have kept players like Solanke, for us who have kept players like Neto, effectively, we've got 5 decent players within our team that we want to play. For Zabarny, for Kirkes, for Senesi even, I just think that the fixtures are so bad on Game Week 34 from a defensive point of view that they're worse than an Everton defender that you'd be transferring into. They're worse than a Crystal Palace defender that you'd be transferring into. So no reason to really even consider the fact that you have 6 doublers right now. I think, to be fair, we only have 5. So for my team, of course, or for anyone who actually has additional Liverpool players, for example, this is the point in time where you can say, of course, you're very well off in Game Week 34 and you're very well prepared. For people who are free hitting on 34, I still think that there's some value to free at 34 because, as I mentioned, you get the ability to keep these Spurs players in your team without any consequences, right? Because if Spurs blank on Game Week 34, which you can see here on this graphic, what is nice about that, of course, is that you get to keep these Spurs players heading towards the next double game week. Now, the next double game week for Spurs isn't amazing. It's still Burnley and Man City. So, of course, one tough fixture and one a brilliant fixture. But that in itself is good enough. And we know that Tottenham actually have plenty of fixtures anyways during that run there, even though the tougher fixtures are actually before that. So, see, of course, the Chelsea games, see, of course, the Arsenal games, and the probability of the Chelsea game really is just about that falling on 35 or 36. And Not that there's going to be two doubles with Chelsea and Tottenham back to back. But that is something to think about. And I think it just tells us, of course, that keeping those Spurs players can be really valuable. We've seen that the Spurs team have scored versus big teams before. And of course, if there's anything that's redeeming about the Spurs team, it's their attack. Now, the weird thing, of course, is that it's hard to carry the attackers through Game Week 34. But it does mean that for people who are planning on 3 or 34, I actually think that the way the fixtures have actually come out has been extremely beneficial, and I would not be, regretting if I was 3 or 34 minded, even though, of course, yes, other people get Arsenal players now, other people get Liverpool players without much hassle. I think the beauty, of course, is that not only can you attack Game Week 34 with Arsenal players, you can actually attack them with Arsenal attackers, as opposed to, let's say, just the tried and true, Saka plus 2 defenders from Arsenal. So you can probably drop Haaland on this Game Week 34 fixture here. As you can see, Man City are playing Brighton away. Not exactly the best fixture. Brighton are actually one of the better defenses, as ironic as that sounds, in the Premier League. And you'd still say that that's a good opportunity for you to drop Haaland, maximize once again on Liverpool, maximize once again on Arsenal, and then have a very well-rounded team comprising of Crystal Palace and Everton players who have good fixtures, of course. And that means your Eze's, potentially, of course, if you go into Wolves, you'll be looking at your Ait-Nouri's and Sarabia's as well. I mean, given how advanced Ait-Nouri is playing due to the recent injuries at Wolves, he becomes very interesting. Sarabia potentially being on penalties, depending on whether Cunha comes back. And of course, the impacts of that are interesting too. And so from that point of view, I actually think there's a lot of things that we can actually think about going forward, particularly when it comes to how to navigate if you're in my position, you've wildcarded already, or you've already used your free hit, and what to do when it comes to attacking both 34 and 37. So just like we talked about in terms of the interrelationship between 34 and 37, one of the things that we've noticed, of course, is that 37, you have a bunch of doublers that do not have any relationship with the Game Week 34 doublers. But I think what's nice, of course, is ultimately carrying Liverpool and Arsenal players, or even, let's say, carrying Chelsea players, is totally fine throughout that period. Because, of course, whilst Chelsea have a bad fixture in Game Week 34, you still need these Chelsea players as soon as they play in their doubles on 35 and 36. At the same time, when we talk about, let's say, a team like Arsenal or Liverpool, we've seen time and time again that because they're such elite teams, and because we're still expecting the title race to potentially be open Game Week 37, that those single fixtures can still be very, very good, holding a single Game Week player from that team, as long as you have, let's say, 2 out of 3 of them, and you're planning on transfers out for other teams like Man City. The big thing with Haaland as well, I think, is if you are someone who isn't, for example, dead ending on 35, or isn't someone who's free hitting on 34, you are basically looking at keeping Haaland throughout this entire period. And I think the best way to do that, of course, is to construct a team that allows you to have Salah as well. And so if Muniz is your answer, at the end of the day, I think you should be comfortable with the fact that maybe Fulham just have a really bad fixture versus Man City. However, another thing that I'll mention too that sort of reduces the ceiling, in my overall opinion, for Game Week 37 is the season could be interesting in terms of the rotation that Man City will be seeing. So if you're thinking about, let's say, investing into players like Foden, I think that's interesting because, of course, he seems to be prioritized for important games. Now, how important the 37 fixtures will be interesting because I think Liverpool and Arsenal have taken a step up, and they will probably compete until the end of the season, unlike last season. However, another thing to add, of course, is that I think we're inevitably going to expect defender and defensive rotation from City. So your Walkers, who did well, or your Edersons, who probably would be the only guaranteed asset, who did well in Game Week 25, not necessarily the case that they're going to do well again for Game Week 37. At the same time, though, I think with United, for example, the idea that they have such good fixtures on Game Week 34, such as the Sheffield United home fixture, just calls into the idea of whether you should just go for someone like Garnacho in 34, and you actually have a really well-rounded team. Let's say you're planning for a general 3-4-3 structure going forwards, and Garnacho's your 5th midfielder. He's an amazing pick that you can carry forward all the way to 37, and he can still be someone that you can actually play versus Sheffield United home on Game Week 34. You don't necessarily need to have 11 doubles for 34, 11 doubles for 37. I think being able to find picks that can actually navigate the landscape are very interesting. Now, going before Game Week 34, I would also say that Chelsea assets do exactly this. Newcastle assets potentially do exactly this as well. If you can find cheap players like Gusto, cheap players like Lascelles, potentially even keep a Gordon all the way through this run, you still have really good Newcastle fixtures in the short term, really good Chelsea fixtures in the short term. As I said with Tottenham, if you're free hitting on 34, that's a different question as well. You can actually keep these Tottenham players too. So there's a lot of ways to actually navigate 34 and 37. But I think what's tight is that you do have to look at maybe Wolves players as well in specific and Liverpool players, just because Liverpool have such good fixtures. And then from Wolves' point of view, they actually have, 2 home games, which of course is very nice. When you contrast that to, for example, Bournemouth, not exactly that you'd get value outside of Solanke. When you, let's say, look at, for example, a team like Everton, still extremely hard to actually pick an attacker from this Everton team. So you're probably going for a defender there. When we talk about Sheffield United, you'd probably skip them altogether. When we talk about the doublers in Gameweek 37, once again, it's about thinking about whether by that time you've got someone like João Pedro who could be playing. United, of course, you probably have someone like Garnacho as well. As I said, he's the player that I'd consider the most. Would I really double up on United defense? Probably not, if I'm honest. As far as Newcastle, probably also fixtures where you don't necessarily need a defender, but you could 100% go for someone like an Isaac, 100% go for someone like a Gordon around that time. With Man City, as I just discussed, it might just be an angle where you go for Ederson within one of those weeks because you know that he's going to play those fixtures. You go for Foden and Haaland as well. And I think that's sort of how you navigate this landscape. With Tottenham, it might just be going back into Son if you have the opportunity to do so, or simply going for maybe keeping, let's say, one of the defenders for this entire run for Tottenham, and then having just a midfielder, someone like Richarlison, if he's actually continuing to start games around that time of the season. So lots of things to think about. Chelsea as well is a team that I like a lot because Petrovic is so cheap, Gusto is very cheap, and I really do not think that Reece James is going to be rushed in any sort of way. We saw last time how slow the progress was for him to get starting in games, and he was still starting every other game. Now that he's actually re-injured anyways, I just think that they're going to take an even slower approach. Why not give him once again another full off season, and maybe he can start the next season fresh, because that unfortunately is just the level of fitness that Reece James has had shown for the last 2 years. And that's pretty much what I would say about the fixtures. All right, so now that the fixture discussion is done, I thought it would be helpful to just remind you guys of what my team was like on Game Week 28, because of course, since I free hit it on Game Week 29, my team will revert back to the Game Week 28 team. No transfers would have been made. I will have one free transfer remaining. So we have Neto, Doughty, Saliba, Gabriel. So unfortunately, you're looking at a Man City fixture here. Son, Palmer, very, very strong. Fernandes, decent, of course, given the Brentford team and how bad they've been in terms of conceding goals. Saka, of course, with a tough fixture, but it seems like he'll be available. Solanke, of course, with a good fixture. Watkins with a good fixture. And Haaland with a mediocre fixture, but at least he's at home. And then, of course, Neto out probably for the rest of the season. Senesi still injured, but he could come back. Pau Torres actually back to full fitness, so not too bad. But of course, it does hurt a little bit that a lot of the contentious players are players that were my differentials on the wild card. And then Flecken, of course, less said the better. So that's going to be my team. What I thought would be helpful with illustrating would be using a team planner this week, showing you what my transfers would be for the next few weeks, heading up until Game Week 34. Because of course, in my position, all I have left is a bench boost 37. So I'm slowly trying to navigate bench boost 37. And I'm also trying to make sure that in the short term, I try to basically field out the best teams possible, trying to navigate around the double Game Week 34 fixtures, but then also keeping an open eye towards Game Week 37. Now, the reality, I think, of course, with the way the fixtures have fallen is that it's very tough for me to have a perfect team for Game Week 37. I'm not going to have a brilliant looking bench boost compared to the rest of the field, and I'm comfortable with that because I tried to get some short-term gains wildcard 26. It didn't work out so well, so I'll have to be going with different players that will hopefully work out, and I'll also be relying on some players who'll be playing in single game weeks, and we know from our history of FPL, of course, that they could do well still on a double game week. It's not necessarily the case that all our doublers are going to be amazing. I think the triple captaincies this year have shown that. The defenders, for example, last week with things like Kirkes, or even going back to the Liverpool double game week, Darwin, Jota, less said the better, but those things can happen, and of course single game weekers can do well. Arsenal did amazing game week 25. Of course, even going back to, let's say, the Bournemouth double game week, we saw plenty of other players do well too. So this week, what my planned transfer is to go out of Doughty, who of course is an injury doubt, into Malo Gusto. Now, Malo Gusto was recalled for his international fixtures from the French under-national 23 team, and he'll just be back to Chelsea, I think, training. It was for an illness, so it wasn't actually for an injury. I think he'll be perfectly fine for the next fixture. And as I said when I talked about Reece James, I don't really think Malo Gusto is going to compete with Reece James, or rather, Reece James is going to compete with Malo Gusto going forwards. I just think that Reece James and his rehabilitation process will be slow, and Gusto has been playing brilliantly. I think every time I watch Chelsea, I'm equally impressed with how good Gusto has been, in the absence of Reece James, of course, and how well that sort of right flank is for this Chelsea team compared, of course, to the left, where I think Mudryk has been developing recently, but you have issues like Colwill injured, or Chilwell, who just generally hasn't played very well this season. So as far as the defense, we're going to be fielding Neto. He simply has a home fixture here and a better home fixture than Flecken. I'm slowly starting to lose complete faith in Flecken, so unfortunately he just sits on the bench. We don't really want to be playing Gabriel and Saliba, but the idea here, of course, is that if, let's say, we think that Senesi is not going to play at all versus Everton, that instead of going for double Bournemouth defense, we're probably going to go with Gabriel versus Man City. This isn't a great fixture, of course. This is a reluctant option, but as you can see, that my defense is in absolute tatters. I still have a mediocre midfield. Saka, I think, will be comfortably fine for the Man City game. We know that he's been managing this injury all season. This was something that Team News and Ticks basically mentioned to us, that he has been dealing with an Achilles issue for the entire course of the season, but more rest is basically better for Saka at this point in time, so hopefully he'll be fit for the Man City game, and we won't be worrying too much. As far as Gusto and Pau, of course, is coming back. This is a good home fixture for once, so that's quite nice in terms of being able to own Pau, finally, for a good home fixture. With Gusto, I think you've got a lot of upside here. I think he's going to play the full game versus Burnley. He's been really good. This is one of the teams to attack, definitely from the attacking point of view, but Burnley as well, I would say, have been very, very poor from their own attack. So when we're looking at clean sheet odds and we're looking at team strengths on attack, I would say, for example, a team like Luton, who of course are relegation contenders, are much better than a team like Burnley on attack, whereas Burnley are closer to a Sheffield United on attack. When we talk about defense, of course, it's more so Luton that we're reminded of, close to that Sheffield United sort of flag bearer level of Premier League badness, but that's basically the reality. In the midfield, we've got Son and Palmer. I'm definitely planning on captaining Son. It does mention, of course, that Haaland is a captaincy option, but I really don't think it's between Son and Haaland. I think it's actually between Son and Palmer. I don't have access to Salah, and a lot of people will be questioning, why not go for Salah in Gaming 30? He's going to be a differential Gaming 30, and that's true, but I also think that Brighton are a pretty competent opponent. Yes, of course, it's nice because it's an Anfield fixture, but at the same time, I don't have a reasonable and quick, easy way of going for Salah. My team has absolute issues with defense. I've got Senesi, who's an injury down. I've got Saliba and Gabriel, who are playing versus Man City, and Pau Torres is fragile enough as a player. So I don't think that I can really accommodate for going for Salah in the short term here. I'd much rather go for Salah in Gaming 30, and I'd much rather take a hit on Gaming 31 to actually get Salah for the prime fixture where we want to be captaining him. In the meantime, of course, as I said, I would rather go for a defender. It could be Gusto, it could be Porro, it could be Virgil van Dijk. As you can see, I have money in the bank, but of course the money in the bank will be spent. And the idea, of course, is to make sure that I have at least money in the bank so that I can move towards Salah quite seamlessly. Now, what's interesting about Gusto, of course, is that he's one of the cheaper defenders in the game. But I suppose one of the issues that I actually am facing with right now is that I kind of have to keep Saliba in my team, because Saliba, of course, will be very useful for the Gaming 34 double. If I went out of Gusto, let's say Saliba, to go for someone like Gusto instead, I would be able to go for something like Salah and Darwin Gaming 31. So when we go to Gaming 31, instead of actually going for Darwin, I've decided to go for Cunha. And the biggest thing here, of course, is that unfortunately I can't go Salah and Darwin, and who are going out, of course, are Watkins and Fernandes. So by going out of Bruno, by going out of Watkins, who both have mediocre fixtures from Gaming 31, Bruno faces Chelsea, and of course Watkins faces City, I don't really want to be dealing with those fixtures. It's a great opportunity to take a hit here and actually upgrade my team in other aspects, right? Neto, unfortunately, still is going to be out of the team, out of commission for a while, but I think that this team can sustain itself because, of course, everyone has really good fixtures outside of Neto, so I can definitely field a team like this. What I like about going for Cunha is that I think that he is the penalty taker for this Wolves team. So I don't think Sarabia will take penalties necessarily away from him if he was to take a penalty. And I think if Cunha's fit, then I'm very happy with being able to own Cunha, particularly if Hwang is out, right? Because if Hwang is out, we basically have a 100% penalty taker for this Wolves team. And he's actually got good fixtures leading up towards Gaming 34. He's got Burnley, Wolves, sorry, not Wolves, but West Ham, Nottingham Forest as well. And so these are good fixtures in the short term that I'm very happy with owning a Wolves player for. And then we can head towards Gaming 34, where we have, once again, 2 home fixtures. And Bournemouth, of course, is the game that we're going to target there. And in this fixture here, I will be captaining Salah. Once again, it shows that Haaland is the captaincy option by default, but I've decided to swap that around. I still think that Haaland's going to be my vice captaincy option. I'll be going for Salah as captain. I might even be considering a vice captaincy over Saka as well. It just really depends on his fitness at that point in time in the season. And in defense, of course, we're fielding Gusto slightly reluctantly, but I think also not many people are going to have amazing defenses on Gaming 31. Having double Arsenal defense is already very, very good versus Luton at home. And then Neto, of course, with a much better fixture compared to Flecken. So that's going to be my Game Week 31, where I'm planning basically to take a -4. And then in Game Week 32, what we're going to plan for here is probably a roll. And the reason why the roll is interesting is because, once again, Game Week 32 is actually a nice fixture for Chelsea. It's also a nice fixture for Spurs. So, of course, if you plan to go for, let's say, a Spurs player, your defense might be looking a little bit better if you have someone like Porro as well. As you can see, Son is versus Nottingham Forest at home. However, I think one of my concerns is that it's still much better for me to roll here because this team looks very, very strong. I don't think there are considerable upgrades in terms of Pau or even Gabriel that I can make in defense. And then when it comes to the midfield and the front line, once again, really good fixtures for my players. Yes, of course, I'm going to be missing out on potentially spending a free transfer here, but I'd much rather roll where I have the ability to kind of assess closer towards Game Week 34 what I would like to do in Game Week 33. So in Game Week 33, after rolling Game Week 22, the plan is to go for Sarabia, and the plan is also to go for Virgil van Dijk. The reason why I'm doing this is because I can't afford Virgil van Dijk without actually moving Neto to Sarabia. Neto is a 5.7 midfielder. Sarabia, of course, is 4.7. That additional 1 million make weight is going to allow me to get to Virgil, and I have a lot of money left in the bank, which of course is very nice, right? The idea for doing this is to get Virgil for a great fixture, Crystal Palace at home. We know Crystal Palace predominantly a very weak attack team, and this is a good fixture here where I can of course bench Gusto. If I don't like the idea of going for double Arsenal defense versus Aston Villa, which I think makes a lot of sense, I think I'll just play Gusto over Saliba as well. So that can be an option that I can be thinking about, and potentially that's probably what I would actually prefer, because at the end of the day, I don't think that's a great fixture for Arsenal, and I'm comfortable benching Saliba. So that is probably the option that I'm thinking about. Son, of course, is a great pick here. Captaincy is going to be slammed on Haaland, though. It is Luton Town at home. And when we talked about who are the two worst defensive teams in the league, I mean, who is the worst actually is Luton. And then second of all is Sheffield United at home. So given that sort of targeting there, we're going for Haaland captaincy. He's at home as well, which is just ludicrous because even that FA Cup fixture was already away from home, and that really wasn't anything that really stopped Haaland in his tracks. And that's going to be how we navigate Game Week 33. That, of course, locks us in terms of a lot of players for Game Week 34, and of course it does make our team on paper a little bit worse for Game Week 37, but we also have to make sure that we capitalize basically the best fixtures possible, and this is still me doing that. And then for Game Week 34, the only transfer I'm actually going to do is to go for Eze, and Eze I think is a brilliant pick to go for. We expect him to stay on Crystal Palace penalties, and the big thing of course is that I will be transferring Son out of the team. So because I mentioned about the issues that Son has as a Game Week 34 player, someone who actually blanks within the team, it does make a lot more sense for me to actually go for Eze here. This way I can actually have 10 doublers within my team. Haaland will be the only single game week player, which I think is totally fine on any game week to do so. Sarabia and Cunha are very, very strong. I do think that ultimately whether I go for Sarabia or not really depends on my budget, because the alternative, of course, is I look for a player like Garnacho, but I might not be able to actually afford him. And it really depends on whether I think Sarabia is going to be on penalties as well, or whether there's a split in terms of the penalty share. Another thing that Sarabia does benefit from, of course, is with Neto being out, he's on a lot of set pieces, which, of course, is very helpful to his value as an asset. And even in the short term, where you can look at the next game week where he's got a Luton at home fixture. Saka and Salah, very, very good fixtures. Captaincy is going to be slammed on Salah. Vice captaincy on Saka. Saliba, Virgil, Gabriel, just amazing picks. And then Neto, as I said, a double game week goalkeeper. So that's game week 34. And that's as far as I've basically planned for now. Because game week 35, 36, we will try to understand and navigate based on when the Chelsea fixtures fall and how they fall. On top of that, too, we'll also be able to navigate game week 37 a little bit better by kind of understanding what the position of the Premier League is. Whether there's, of course, competition at the top, whether Man City are close to winning another league title, or whether, of course, another team have sort of become runaway favorites, and whether they're actually prone to rotating as well, depending on, let's say, whether Arsenal have progressed in the Champions League, depending on whether Man City themselves have progressed in the Champions League as well. So those are kind of my immediate thoughts in terms of my transfer plan so far. Going back all the way to game week 31, I think the alternative here is that I go for Darwin over Cunha, and that really depends on whether I believe the penalty share is on Cunha or Sarabia. Because if, let's say, I don't believe that Cunha is the penalty taker on this game week, I do think that the alternative here is I take a -8 instead. I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but I think a -8 does make sense in terms of rectifying my team, because, of course, there's no one at the sort of price point of Neto that I can actually move to, except for Sarabia, that I can actually allow myself to go for Darwin. So if I just quickly show what's going on here, I'd basically be going out of Neto, out of Cunha, and then actually going for Darwin. And then I'd also be going for a Sarabia here as well. But this would unfortunately take a -8. Of course, this leaves me in a position where I have 0.6 million in the bank. And I think that that obviously changes all my future transfers, because that will probably not allow me to go for Virgil van Dijk, which is totally fine. At the end of the day, I might just go for an Everton defender instead, and that could be the alternative. But I also like the idea that I can go for Cunha if I think he's on penalties, and I think he could still be better than Darwin in the short term, which is nice. Now, of course, the big thing here is that this allows me to capitalize on Darwin versus Sheffield United at home, as opposed to missing out on that fixture. But of course, the flip side is I take a -8, and the flip side is I don't get Cunha at all, and I kind of put my money within the Sarabia bank and sort of trust into that. So that's an alternative here, but I don't think that I'm necessarily married to this option. I prefer the option with one less hit. I also prefer the option where I get a bit more of a split in terms of getting more penalty takers within the team, within, let's say, Cunha, and still getting a budget option like a Sarabia, and then sort of navigating my transfers later down the line. So those are my transfer plans. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.